Hi, I'm Wes Allen with DM Tales, and today I'm going to be taking a look at yet another one of Goodman Games' original adventures reincarnated. This is my look at Into the Borderlands. Let's roll it. The Keep On The Borderlands, which is B2, is probably the adventure that has the dearest place in my heart just because it's the first module I ever owned. It came in the Moldvay Basic set, and so that's what I had to read and learn and figure out how to do things like floor plans. That was all in B2. So it really is just got this special place, and it's nice to go back now as an adult and kind of see really how this adventure holds up. And it holds up pretty well. As with all the original Adventures Reincarnated books, this is a stitch binding hardbound cover. It is going to last a really long time, and it does indeed have a built-in book ribbon, which I always think is just a beautiful touch. The hardbound book weighs in at 384 pages. It has 2 scans each for both B1, Into the Unknown, and B2, which is the Keep on the Borderlands. And these two printings had several differences between them. The B2 differences are a lot more pronounced, and we'll get into that in a little bit. At the end of the book, there is the 5e conversion, along with 5e versions of the new creatures, magic items, and spells. And there are a lot of them in here, despite the fact that it is a beginning module. And then it ends up with some ads for some Dungeon Crawl Classic stuff, which is Goodman Games' own role-playing game. The insides of the front and the back covers show the maps for B2 and B1, and it's really nice to see them again after so many years. Really nicely done. It's a good touch on the interior of the book. What really impressed me, however, is the amount of new artwork in the 5e conversions for both B1 and B2. A lot of it takes on that old school pencil draw feel from the original modules, and some of them are a little bit more smooth. You can tell that they were done digitally, but they still evoke that same feeling. Some of the new pieces of art evoke a sense of whimsy, some of them terror and horror, but all of them give you this impression of exploring, which is what old school D&D was really about. It was about going into the dungeon and seeing what was down there, going into the cave and seeing what was lurking there. For me, one of the selling points for this entire series are the opening essays that come into the book. They offer some of the historic backdrop for a lot of these modules. And whenever they can, they're trying to find people who originally worked on them. In the case of B2, which is the cover of this Into the Borderlands, the original author happens to be Gary Gygax. He is no longer with us. However, they did get the introduction to be done by his son, Luke Gygax, and he talked about how he learned how to DM partly by using B2. It wasn't sitting down with his dad and having his dad go through everything about how to do it. He learned it from this module, the same way that many of us did. I find that really fascinating. For me, the highlight of the intro essays, though, is the interview with Mike Carr, who is the one who wrote B1 and came up with the idea that it would be a blank dungeon that gives some descriptions and rooms, but it had to be stocked, and this was a teaching module. I remember when I first got B2 in the basic set, and I was wondering why on earth B1 wasn't there, because there's a B1, I wanted to find it. And literally Into the Borderlands is the first time I ever was able to read it. So that makes me really happy. Mike gives some great insight into the history of the gaming at that time, his own place in TSR, and some insights as to why they shifted to B2 after a while for later printings of the Holmes Basic set, and then finally into Moldvay and Cook Basic and Expert. So really good interview. If you are interested in the history of the game at all, these are essays you really want to track down and be able to read. As I said earlier, this book contains 2 reprints for both B1 and B2. One of the things that has tracked throughout my collection of the original Adventures Reincarnated series is that whenever there are 2 printings given, the later printing, which is usually 81 and up, always has a heavier weight to it. It's darker. And I don't know if that's because the printing process wasn't quite as strong back in the earlier printings, or they just changed the process at some point. But it always is more weighty on the second printing. And it's interesting because as I read the first printing, I find it a little less harsh on the eyes, and I would really love at some point to figure out why that change got made, what entailed it. But the scans are clear, really legible, easy to read, and it's so much fun for me to go back and flip through these modules from of old, including, as I said, B1, which I had never read before. There are differences between the two. The most profound differences are in the reprintings of B2. There are just a number of changes. Artwork is shifted between the two printings. And also, one of the most notable is that the earlier printing of B2 was designed to go into the Holmes Basic set, which used a dexterity-based initiative system. So every creature in the game had to have a dexterity score. This is way before 3.5 when creatures had their ability scores. In Moldvay Cook, however, it went to a roll mechanic for initiative. Dexterity was no longer needed for the creature blocks, and so it was stripped out. Those are the two big differences between the two reprints, the dexterity score and the changed artwork. Most of the content is exactly the same. As I pointed out, B1 is a bare bones dungeon. The descriptions are there. You are meant to stock it on your own. But Chapter 3 in this book includes 3 different versions of a pre-stocked B1 that a GM can use to throw into the game and just take adventures through without having to do that legwork themselves. It's a really nice inclusion, and in keeping with an old school mentality, it's really bare bones how it puts things in. It's really compact, and it gives you what you need in order to throw the encounter at your party. So really easy then to pick up B1 and just run it. Just pick A, B, or C for one of the pre-stocked dungeons. Very nice inclusion. Now, the key draw for a lot of this is for the 5e conversions for folks, for people who want to run this with the current system. B1 is a stocked dungeon in the 5e conversion, although there are hints on how you can stock the dungeon yourself if you want to do it full old school method for B1. And in B2, a lot of the things are just kept the same. The people who live in the keep, they're not given names, with the exception of one particular NPC. He is Maravac the Advisor, who does appear in the original adventure, but he's not named. But here in this reimagination, this reincarnation of B2, he is someone who served the masters of the dungeon in B1, the Caves of Quesquentin. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And he has come back to the keep because he's trying to figure out a way to go back and take over this place. The wilderness area gets fleshed out a little further. Some of the landmarks are named. There is a heightened description of the types of interactions that the different creatures are having, and it makes that small grid crawl, it's not really a hex crawl, a grid crawl, feel a little bit more engaging. There's some stuff that's included in the 5e conversion that if I ever ran this for one of my older school tables, I'd probably re-import it back in. It just fleshes it out nicely and gives you some more things to check out. Very well done. The Caves of Chaos does not get a new map feel to it. It's more of a representation of the old school classic map, although it is in black and white. It is very clear, however, so that is really nicely done. And just as with B1, it's a fantastic upgrade for all the encounters that are found therein. Although again, there's some minor fleshing out of details to explain what different creatures are going to do if parties make certain arrangements inside the caves. So it's a really nice reimagining, and in both B1 and B2, the conversions have some added areas of exploration. In B1, there is one area each for the 2 masters of the Caves of Quesquentin, and one of those introduces an NPC that I will not reveal, because if you want to play this as a 5e party, you should not know what's going on there, but it could make for some really fun role-playing as you transition into the second adventure. Just pointing that out. And in the B2 conversion, there are 3 new areas of exploration, including a deeper cave that is hidden, and finally a fleshing out of a passageway that existed in the original adventure, but was never really explained. It was just, you make this yourself, that says to the cave of the unknown, which everybody at that point believed was the cave of Quasquentin, and now that has been confirmed, at least in this module. So it fleshes out how that cavern works and what you might encounter on the way between the caves of Chaos and the caves of Quasquentin. Really, really cool. So these added areas of exploration give some new material for folks who might have played this as kids and now they're coming back and they think they know it all, but whoa, hold on, here's a new passageway that you've never gone down before. I love that each of these Goodman Games adventures have added things like this, and it really adds to the value. And as I pointed out, the appendices of this book include both new monsters and new magic items and spells. Some of the new monsters are actually creatures that exist in non-core books for 5e, but they're included here and they are identical to how they appear in the other non-core D&D 5e books. And as I pointed out, there's a good number of new spells and new magic items and new monsters that you wouldn't necessarily expect in a beginning adventure until you realize this is supposed to be a training adventure. A DM back in old school, as well as today, is really encouraged to make their own magic items, their unique spells, their unique effects that different weapons might actually inflict or output into the world. And their appearance in this beginning adventure, levels 1 through 3. Most people nowadays only start at level 3. It shows you that creativity really is part and parcel of being a DM. You're encouraged to make the world your own. And I like that they're included in there. So this is a terrific update of the first adventure module I ever owned. I love the added areas. I think the new artwork, as I said, is beautiful, and the 5e conversions are spot on. There are a couple of critiques that I have of this. The first is the way that the book is presented in its 5e areas. Now, in old school gaming, there was box text. So if you had an old school module, there would be an area of text that was surrounded in a box, and this was supposed to be read by the DM to the party as they entered in. Usually it's description. And in the 5e conversions, this has been converted from block text to italicized text. It does look more modern. It does look more presentable by modern sensibilities and design techniques. But in my old age and with these weary, tired eyes, I find reading large amounts of italicized text to be really, really tedious. And so I was skipping a lot of the descriptive text as I went through this book, and I had to go back and actually look at it again. Wait, what was going on in that room? Even though part of me knew because I remember the adventure from way back when. I would have much rather seen the block text updated not into italicized text because it is hard to read, but into their beautiful callouts that they use, which was any material in the 5e conversion, which is DM facing. Like you're just supposed to read this as a DM so you understand something. Those callouts are gorgeous. And that would have been great to have in as the actual box text instead of just plain italics. It would have made it easier to read and much easier on my old and tired eyes. And because these are old school adventures that have been reincarnated for 5e and a lot of the purchase behind them is nostalgia, I have a feeling a lot of the people who buy the books have similarly tired eyes. My second critique, which is just part of the way the book is laid out. The old school modules, the map was pretty much always printed on the inside of the cover, which was not even stapled into the book. You just slipped it out. You could use it as an impromptu DM screen if you wanted to. That was really helpful because as you read through the book, you could have the map out and you could easily find the number and just keep reading. This is a hardbound book, which is gorgeous and it's going to last forever, and there's nothing I can say that's bad about the construction of these books. But I would love to be able to have those maps detached. Now, I could take a photograph of it and use it that way, but that's more work on my part. I would love to be able to have just a little insert or a slip out that I could pull out, and here's the map. Open it up, and now I can read the key, the description of the rooms below. That would be really, really helpful. Or, barring that, even making a PDF available to folks who buy these books, because they're not available as PDF versions. It is only print. But maybe have an errata that puts the maps and maybe some of the artwork in there that's essential for handouts, and make that a PDF that people can download. Don't even know if it's possible, because Goodman Games might have a license that doesn't allow them to do that, but it would be really helpful for folks who are trying to figure out which room is which without having to flip back and forth through pages. Other than those two minor critiques, this is a fantastic piece of work. The two reprintings of the original adventures and the 5e conversion are spot on. They are beautiful. If you have a nostalgia for old school gaming, this is something you probably want on your shelves, particularly if you are like me and you don't have your original modules anymore. And if you're someone who is interested in the history of the game, this is something you really might want to consider picking up. So for me, the price is well worth it. Into the Borderlands is a win. Now, next week, I'm going to be looking at another piece of history, a book called Art and Arcana, which is a visual history of Dungeons & Dragons. After that, I'm going to get to something for all of my basic fantasy RPG fans who view the channel, and we'll be looking at Morgan's Fort, which is kind of an early campaign setting for low-level characters in that system. Until I see you all again, happy playing, everyone.